This is not just another diplomatic meeting in Geneva. It is a moment quietly reshaping the balance of power inside the Western alliance. As Ukraine and Russia prepare for new negotiations, headlines focus on dialogue and stabilization. But the decisive movement is not in Geneva. It is in Washington. Donald Trump is not trying to deliver symbolic peace. He is redefining the conditions under which this war remains sustainable. For nearly 4 years, the structure was predictable. The United States financed and coordinated. Europe reinforced sanctions and aid. Ukraine defended. Russia endured. The battlefield shifted. Funding expanded. Alliance messaging held. It was not stable peace, but it was stable cohesion. That cohesion is now under strain. Trump does not frame this war through moral obligation. He frames it through leverage, durability, and strategic return. His stance is not disengagement. It is conditional commitment. And conditional commitment changes structure. When support is no longer assumed to be indefinite, predictability erodes. When predictability erodes, behavior adjusts. If American funding becomes conditional, Kyiv must reassess its timeline. If Europe is expected to absorb greater cost, Brussels confronts political limits. If Moscow senses uneven resolve, it converts patience into leverage. This is not emotional repositioning. It is calibrated pressure. Trump's premise is clear. The United States will not sustain an open-ended conflict without measurable strategic yield. That premise alone alters negotiation psychology before formal terms are drafted. For Europe, the exposure is immediate. Unlike the United States, this war is not distant. It sits on Europe's frontier. It shapes energy security, defense spending, industrial planning, electoral stability. European governments have supported Ukraine with financial resolve and political clarity, but clarity does not eliminate accumulation, and accumulated strain forces reprioritization. The Geneva talks are not simply about territory. They are about endurance thresholds. How long can cohesion survive conditional backing? Who absorbs escalating cost? And who defines what success means? Trump is not seeking dramatic breakthrough. He is testing alliance resilience. Because in prolonged conflicts, resilience often outweighs momentum. If resilience weakens unevenly, gravity shifts from the battlefield to the negotiating table. That is why this meeting matters. Not because peace is imminent, but because the internal balance inside the Western coalition is shifting. And once balance shifts, restoring it becomes far harder than preserving it. Once commitment becomes conditional, arithmetic replaces rhetoric. That is the shift now unfolding. For years, the Ukraine war operated under assumed continuity. Funding packages were debated but rarely doubted. Sanctions expanded. Military coordination intensified. The expectation of endurance created stability. Conditional backing introduces a new variable, visible cost. And once cost becomes visible, it becomes political. The United States has already committed extensive financial and military resources, advanced systems, training networks, long-term reconstruction planning. Each new package extends obligation forward. Trump's recalibration forces a sharper question. What is the measurable return? Not in abstract moral language, in strategic effect. Has Russia been structurally weakened? Has Western deterrence strengthened? Has Europe increased its own defense capacity? If those answers remain uncertain, sustainability becomes negotiable. This is not withdrawal, it is performance-based commitment. And performance-based commitment reshapes leverage. Kyiv now operates within narrower margins. If battlefield momentum slows while funding tightens, operational flexibility contracts. Brussels faces parallel constraints. Defense expansion is costly. Energy diversification is expensive. Industrial adjustment strains budgets. European governments can support Ukraine, but they must also preserve domestic stability. That balance grows harder when continuity from Washington is no longer assumed. Moscow interprets endurance differently. Russia does not require rapid victory. It requires patience. If Western cohesion weakens incrementally, negotiating leverage strengthens incrementally. Time becomes strategic capital. Trump's approach introduces controlled uncertainty into a system that once felt predictable. Not chaos, conditionality. And conditionality forces limits into view. The longer a coalition operates without defined endpoint, the more hidden strain accumulates. This recalibration surfaces that strain. If Europe increases defense autonomy, responsibility redistributes. If Europe hesitates, dependence becomes more visible. Either way, alliance structure evolves. Geneva may be the visible negotiation, but budget endurance is the deeper one. And in modern conflict, financial sustainability often shapes outcomes before battlefield conclusions are reached. The question is no longer whether support continues. The question is, under what conditions? And once conditions are formalized, alignment must be tested. Prolonged alliances rarely fracture suddenly. They erode through recalculation. Across Europe, that recalculation is becoming measurable. Not as opposition to Ukraine, not as sympathy for Moscow, but as structured caution. Defense expenditures are rising while inflation remains persistent. Energy systems are being rebuilt at structural cost. Industrial competitiveness is under pressure from both internal adjustment and global competition. Political coalitions are absorbing continuous external strain. Public support for Ukraine remains present, but sustained support requires economic tolerance, and tolerance narrows over time. Trump's conditional framework interacts directly with this narrowing space. By shifting from assumed continuity to performance-based commitment, he accelerates a question European governments have deferred. Is the objective total territorial reversal or sustainable containment? Total reversal demands maximal alignment and extended endurance. Containment accepts managed instability and negotiated limits. Those are not tactical differences, they are structural choices. If Washington leans toward containment logic, Europe must evaluate whether its own tolerance matches that shift. Because Europe absorbs the geographic and economic consequences more directly than the United States. Beyond Europe, external observers interpret these signals carefully. China measures Western resolve through durability rather than declarations. If American commitment becomes explicitly conditional in Europe, strategic modeling adjusts elsewhere. Russia interprets endurance asymmetrically. It does not require rapid breakthrough. It requires incremental advantage through uneven tolerance. If Western unity weakens gradually, negotiating leverage accumulates gradually. By introducing conditional backing, Trump compresses the timeline for clarity. Limits become visible sooner. Once limits are visible, strategic behavior adapts. If Europe increases defense integration and fiscal commitment, alliance structure evolves toward greater autonomy. If hesitation persists, dependency becomes more pronounced. Either outcome modifies transatlantic balance. The Geneva talks therefore represent more than negotiation over territory. They expose endurance synchronization inside the Western system. And in prolonged conflicts, synchronized endurance often outweighs battlefield momentum. If synchronization holds, containment stabilizes. If it diverges, leverage redistributes. And redistributed leverage rarely returns to its previous equilibrium. What happens next will not be defined by a single meeting in Geneva. It will be defined by endurance alignment. There are three plausible trajectories. The first is controlled stabilization. Front lines freeze without formal recognition. Security assurances remain informal. Ukraine remains sovereign but structurally constrained. Russia claims partial achievement without total victory. The war becomes contained, not resolved. This outcome reduces immediate escalation, but it institutionalizes tension along Europe's frontier. The second trajectory is prolonged strain. Negotiations stall. American support remains conditional. Europe increases funding but absorbs growing domestic pressure. Russia extends limited offensives to test resolve. The conflict continues without decisive shift. Unity holds, but under visible fatigue. The third trajectory is internal disruption. Political shifts in Kiev, Moscow, or Washington accelerate recalibration. Funding priorities change. Negotiating positions harden or soften abruptly. Strategic continuity fractures. History suggests prolonged wars rarely end neatly. They conclude when structural tolerance is exhausted. Trump's recalibration does not determine which scenario unfolds, but it influences how quickly structural limits are exposed. By introducing conditional commitment, he compresses timelines. He forces explicit calculation. How much is sustainable? For how long? Under what measurable return? Europe now confronts a strategic choice: absorb greater defense responsibility and redefine autonomy, or resist burden redistribution and risk prolonged dependency. Neither path is cost-free. Both reshape the transatlantic balance. The Geneva talks are therefore not decisive in isolation. They are diagnostic. They reveal how aligned endurance truly is inside the Western coalition. If endurance remains synchronized, containment stabilizes. If endurance diverges, leverage shifts. And leverage, once shifted, is rarely restored easily. Trump is not dismantling the alliance. He is redefining its operating terms. From open-ended solidarity to conditional coordination. That shift may produce efficiency, it may produce strain, but it will not preserve the previous equilibrium. The most significant consequence of this recalibration is not territorial, it is structural. It alters how responsibility is distributed, how risk is shared, how sustainability is measured. And once those metrics change, every future conflict will be evaluated differently. This is why Geneva matters, not because peace is imminent, but because the architecture of commitment is being rewritten in real time. And in geopolitics, architecture outlasts headlines.